Destiny rules everything. Sometimes it seems to a person that nothing else can happen. In his measured life, everything has settled down. There is a family, work, some well-established personal interests. Her habitual circle of friends and girlfriends officially allowed to you. Equal relations in the family, loving wife and daughter. That's what I thought. I was sure that by the age of 40 my life is quite established and nothing forebodes any change. I married quite early in my 20s to a remarkably beautiful girl with a name unusual for our places, Michelle. She was a slender, brown-haired girl with piercing blue eyes. She was a year younger than me, which was a favorable age balance for starting a family. A year later, my daughter Marina was born. We stopped there having decided that enough children were born. I was in the army, and our wanderings in garrisons did not contribute to our family. I had to fight a little during my service and as a consequence received an order and a splinter in my back. I hid the order far away in a closet and carried only the shrapnel, which periodically reminded me of itself. The shrapnel was inoperable and was lodged somewhere in the spine, squeezing a nerve, which caused severe pain in my back. The doctors gave me a discouraging prognosis: with the lapse of time my legs might fail. I was discharged from the Army because of sickness and got a job as a school teacher. But my pedagogical activity didn't last long. After a while my left leg began to grow numb and dry. It lost sensitivity and stopped bending. I could move, but with great difficulty and with the help of a stick. I had to quit my job and go on disability. I could see perfectly well that my condition stressed my wife and daughter. Michelle became irritable, snapped at any trifle. She began to stay late at work, sometimes coming home smelling of alcohol. The prospect of living with an invalid husband clearly did not inspire her. My daughter, too, reduced her contact with me to a minimum, which in principle was also quite understandable. In the last month, my wife had not come home several times, explaining it by urgent and unexpected business trips. At first, she somehow tried to explain her absences, but then she just started to tell me to go away. I knew perfectly well that my wife had found a replacement for me and was waiting for an opportunity to leave. I did not clarify the relationship. Everything was clear as it was. It remained only to wait for the denouement, and it came. It all happened one rainy November evening. Have you ever noticed that life-changing events happen on rainy autumn evenings? It's as if dying nature is trying to drag you down with it. That evening, I was at home as usual. My wife and daughter were still out. The doorbell rang and a middle-aged, well-groomed guy smelling of expensive perfume appeared on the doorstep. A typical member of the tribe of men who are a cross between an ATM machine and a vibrator. "Hello? Shall I come in?" he switched to you from the doorstep. I moved aside, letting the uninvited guest in. "We have to talk. Let's sit in the kitchen." He knew his way around our apartment. "Let's skip the preamble. Michelle and I love each other and we want to be together." "How long have you been in love?" For some reason, I was not much surprised. 6 months now. She feels sorry for you and doesn't dare to leave you. Let her go, don't ruin her life. By the way, all this time your daughter is aware of the events and does not judge her mother. The guest took out a cigarette. "You're an invalid. You shouldn't ruin a young woman's life." Here, he smoked and handed me an envelope. "Consider it as compensation for the years lived with Michelle. It's enough for you for a long time." I looked at him silently and thought that if I hit him between the eyes, he would immediately lose his gloss and assertiveness and then add to his legs. "Yes. It's not harmful to dream." And then I stood up leaning on my stick, letting him know that the conversation was over. "I think you will make the right decision." It seems that he felt something, so he put the envelope on the table and quickly left the apartment. That's how it happened. Kind of mundane, even. I expected a surge of emotion, anger, despair. But alas, I was apparently ready for such a turn of events. It remained only to wait for my wife and close the subject. Michelle and Marina arrived at about 9 o'clock in the evening. Once upon a time long ago, my wife used to kiss me on the cheek after my return from work. But lately, she limited herself to a dry nod. I sat in the kitchen and wished only one thing, that it would all be over sooner. Michelle knew about the visit of her lover, so she started without any preambles. "Husband, our life together has become unbearable lately," she began, but I did not let her finish. "Don't, Michelle. I know all about her ruined youth and difficulties of life with an invalid husband. Let's not make a scene. Let's not get into it." I stood up. My daughter stood looking at me in silence without saying a word. But in her eyes, I read pity mixed with squeamishness. It was clear the father was an invalid, even worse than the invalid husband. I went out into the corridor, put on my coat, then returned to the kitchen and silently pushed the envelope with the money in Michelle's direction. She turned her head and looked at me with empty alien eyes. "This is your compensation for the years you've lived with me." I took my valise and silently walked out of the apartment. Number 1 held me back. It was late autumn. Rain was falling, which added to my already low spirits. I felt no despair for what had happened, for I had evidently been ready for such a turn of events. There were no special thoughts in my mind. I just walked silently along the wet houses. I had to get on with my life somehow. There was only one question at the moment. Where? The apartment belonged to Michelle, and I had no chance to sue for a corner there. And frankly, I had no desire to. I took out my phone and called my army friend. Luckily, he answered quickly and agreed to put me up for a while. My phone beeped. I looked at the screen and saw a new message. My former roommate, Pauline, asked me to call her back right away. I dialed her number and immediately heard a familiar voice. "Dima, hello. Leonid and I are leaving tomorrow to visit Nina in Haifa. We've sold everything except the antique store. I'm very indebted to your grandmother, and I've decided to leave the store to you. You know the address and all the paperwork is on the desk. Myra, a distant relative of mine, works there, and she will explain everything to you. Hello to Michelle and Marina. Kisses." She passed out. Frankly, I was a little taken aback. It seemed that my fate today for the first time sat on a bike and immediately began to make zigzags. The question of the rest of my life was settled. I was not aware of what Pauline was so obliged to my grandmother, but apparently the service rendered was so important that she did not hesitate to give her grandson, that is me, an antique store. I decided not to hurry and spend the night at a friend's house today and tomorrow to go to the Now My store. Antique store I found quickly. It was in the miracle-preserved old two-story house, squeezed on both sides, stylized in the old buildings. The sign on the facade was very laconic: antiques. Sale purchase expertise. At the front door, hang a neat sign: open. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Somewhere in the back of the store, a bell rang. A young black-haired woman came out from behind the counter and with a friendly smile asked, "What can I do for you?" "Hello, I'm Dimitri. Nice to meet you. I'm Myra. Aunt Paulina told me about you. Let's go into the office, and I'll show you all the documents for the store." She made an inviting gesture. We entered a small corridor at the end of which there was a staircase leading to the second floor. But Myra opened a side door, and I saw a small room which seemed to be an office. There were several cases of porcelain along the walls. A rug hung picturesquely on the free wall, on which was a collection of antique weapons. In one of the display cases, I saw an antique helmet with a half-mask and a beret. I had been reading a lot lately, including a lot about antique weapons, so I remembered some of the terms. In the center of the room stood a massive carved table with an armchair. On the tabletop was a black leather folder. Myra opened it. "Here is the deed to the store. All the taxes are paid. You just need to sign the document here and here." She pointed with a thin finger where. And the store is yours. In half an hour, the notary arrived and the transfer procedure was completed. I leaned my stick against the table and slowly sank into a chair. Myra, what are your future plans? Will you stay here to work or will you leave? I looked at the woman. I would like to stay if you do not mind. She smiled. Well, on the contrary. I'll be very grateful to you, especially since I know nothing about antiques. On the second floor is an apartment. True, it is small, just one room and a kitchen. Myra gave me a stick. It belongs to the store, so it also belongs to you. We went up the wooden stairs to the second floor. Behind the door was a fairly spacious room and an adjoining kitchenette equipped with all the kitchen appliances. There was also a bathroom and a toilet. Well, this was my shelter for years to come, and it was where I would spend the time that fate intended when I finally lost the ability to move. Make yourself comfortable, and I'll make you some coffee. Myra went into the kitchen. Myra, where do you live? I've been watching her finesse. At the stove. I used to live here, but then I rented a room. It's not far from the store. We open at 10, so it's very convenient for me. She poured coffee into a little porcelain cup and put it in front of me. And so began my career as an antique dealer. I tried to learn all the secrets of the new profession. Together with Myra, I went to clients for evaluation and expertise. On weekends, we disappeared at the local flea market. She taught me and showed me in practice how to find a valuable thing in a pile of old junk. I began to look at the world around me with different eyes, trying to find something valuable in it. Realistically, I became fascinated by the world of antiques and without even realizing it by Myra. I liked everything about her. And her Jewish prudence, calmness, discreet beauty, and gentle nature. Especially beautiful was her soul, a pure and bright person. But I was afraid to let her see it or to hint at it in any way. My future was bleak. Nothing good awaited me there. Why would a young woman need a paralytic? So I drove away from myself sudden feelings. I began to read a lot of special literature. And my training bore fruit. Little by little, I began to understand porcelain. By marks. I unmistakably determined at what factory this or that thing was made. How much to buy it and at what price I could sell it later. I had regular customers, and the day came when I ordered business cards. The card had only my name, profession, and my new phone number Mitri. Antiques. My new business was getting better. Everything was going well. Everything except my health. The doctor's prognosis was beginning to come true. My left leg was completely paralyzed, so it was going to a wheelchair. I was anxiously waiting for the disease to spread to my right leg. During all this time, Michelle and Marina never called me. True. A month later after I left, Michelle's lawyer called me and offered to sign the divorce papers. He came to my store and I signed everything Michelle wanted. I never heard from my former family again. They had finally severed all relations with me. I held no grudge against them. But the betrayal of my own daughter left a bleeding wound in my heart. One cold May evening after a bad day, I sat by the fireplace to warm myself. Myra had already gone home. I closed the store and settled in my study. I didn't feel like reading or watching anything. I poured myself a whiskey and decided to relax a little. Suddenly someone knocked on the door of the store. Who would come at this late hour? An ex-wife? Or her lover? Or maybe the daughter had a conscience? And decided to visit her sick father. In part 2, you'll find out how this unpredictable story ends. When I reached the door, I saw an elderly woman with a roll in her hands. Woman, we are closed, come back tomorrow. I was about to close the door. Young man, I won't keep you. I am leaving tomorrow morning. And I need money urgently. I think you will buy it. The woman looked me straight in the eye, and I involuntarily took a step aside and let her in. The store. It's a travel box, early 19th century. I don't even know how it ended up in my family. I have no use for it, so I came to offer it to you," she said, as she unwrapped the bundle. "Do you want me to appraise it, or are you selling it?" "Both." She carefully set the ivory-encrusted, lacquered wooden box on the table. "Well, what do you think? It's very beautiful and it's worth a lot of money." "I don't know why," I said. "A sum of 1.5 times the real value of the box." The woman smiled. "Well, I agree." The woman had long since left, but I kept looking at the box and opening and closing the lid as if mesmerized, admiring the beauty of the finish. Then I took all the drawers out of the box and began to gently tap the walls, carefully checking the grooves in which they were attached. "It looks like it has a secret," I thought. "But what is the secret and how do I find it?" While I was doing this, I didn't notice how morning came. There was still no result. In the afternoon, I continued to study the box with even greater zeal. I carefully studied it inch by inch. I slid the drawers in and out many times. I tapped the bottom, the lid, the walls. But it was in vain. The secret would not come out. I had no doubt it was there. At that time, no jewelry box like this was produced by craftsmen without hidden compartments. Such boxes were used as a necessary travel item when traveling frequently in stagecoaches or carriages. It simply had to have such a nook invisible to the eyes of strangers where important documents, money, and valuables were kept. Another day went by, and the box never revealed its secret. I became angry. There was even a moment when I wanted to hit the box on the floor, but I tried to calm down and start all over again. I tapped the box again, opened one half of the drawers and pressed the walls, the bottom, and the lid. But all in vain. The cache was undetectable. The night without sleep had done its work. Tiredness drove me away. Sleep crept up unnoticed. It overtook me. At the table on which the box stood, I dreamed that I had found the secret of the box and opened the secret compartment. But when I woke up, I couldn't remember anything. It's a pity to break it. I'll put an appropriate price. Who knows about such things will buy it. But still I decided to try it one last time. I tried to imagine the movement of the owner to open the secret compartment. I moved the box toward me and pressed the lid with both hands. There was a crackling sound and with a quiet rustle, the right latch swung open. It was so sudden that I even recoiled. Wow! It's so simple. In the stash that opened was a small bundle wrapped in a white flap. I carefully unwrapped the cloth. In the flap of cloth were several silver coins, blackened by time, and a ring. I placed it carefully in the palm of my hand, trying to gauge its weight. It was very old and seemed to be made of silver. The thing was, it was obviously a man's ring. And in the old day, silver was considered a masculine metal, unlike gold, a feminine metal. Men who risked wearing gold jewelry risked being misunderstood by their contemporaries. Later, however, everything changed and jewelry made of gold began to be worn by men as well. But even nowadays, understanding men will never wear gold jewelry. I took a magnifying glass and looked closely at the ring. The beast's, now with its mouth open, looked very impressive. The eyes of the predator were skillfully inset with black amethysts, a very rare variety of this semi-precious stone. The finest carvings, hundreds of minutes strokes, every wrinkle, every crease seemed to be reflected or made the beast's muzzle almost alive. The stripes, the green, the fangs. I scrutinized the ring. And the eyes. They seemed too meaningful. I pushed the ring away. Surely, this is the look of a tiger. The beast's muzzled face was finely jeweled. But how had this masterpiece ended up in the box? Who had made it and to whom did it belong? The tarnished silver was almost devoid of the usual scuff and scratches that come with this kind of jewelry. There was only one small flaw. A nick that I thought might have come from a blow with a sword or axe. I couldn't take my eyes off the unusual ring, and deep down inside, I was suddenly afraid. I could not understand what it was. And suddenly I got it, the eyes. The eyes of an enraged tiger. They were like alive, and their pupils were lit up with black light streaming out of them. And they weren't looking away from me. They were looking right into my soul. These eyes burned through suddenly. It was hard to breathe. My heart was pounding under my throat. Fear came up from its hidden depths and with sticky clutches seized and bound my whole body. I shook my head trying to pull myself together. It was an obsession of vapor. It seems to me that the elaborately made monster is examining me as if getting acquainted. In fact, the tiny meticulously slit eyes are simply filled with incredibly bright black amethysts. But why can't I turn away from this mesmerizing gaze? Suddenly, I involuntarily put the ring on the ring finger of my right hand. Immediately, it felt hot. The heat went up my arm too, my shoulder, and spread all over my body. My heart began to pound even harder. I began to fall into a bottomless well. And a moment later, everything was gone. I was sound asleep. I woke up in pain. My left leg was very painful. It pulsed and whined and throbbed a nord at my thigh. My left leg, which had been paralyzed for 6 months, I put my hands on the tabletop and tried to stand up. With my feet, I felt the cold that was streaming across the floor. Holding on to the back of the chair and the tabletop, I tried to reach for my stick. I caught it awkwardly, and it fell, hitting my left foot. I involuntarily jerked my foot away. The stick was hurting me. My leg was coming back to life. I could even wiggle my toes a little. And then my gaze was drawn to my right hand. From the ring finger, the cold black eyes of a grinning white tiger looked at me. Only the grin seemed to me not too frightening. On the contrary, the tiger was smiling. A year and a half passed. My business was well established. I enjoyed steady authority among colleagues, antique dealers, and customers. I managed to expand the business by opening 2 more stores in our city and a large antique showroom in the capital. I did not walk with a limp, but the habit of even carrying a cane, which gave me more charm. Doctors vied with each other to tell me that it was a miracle that this just could not be. I listened to them, just smiling, looking at the ring with the tiger. My splinter no longer clamped the nerve, and after a simple operation was removed. And finally, I married Myra. And she managed to give me a wonderful daughter. We lived in a country house, but with nostalgia. I remembered a small apartment above the antique store where everything began. Faith gave me the opportunity to meet Michelle. One day I got a call. And a woman's voice asked me to appraise the jewelry. I am not a jeweler, and I wanted to refuse right away. But the voice sounded familiar. And when the woman gave me her address, I recognized Michelle. It's strange she should be in the Bahamas by now. We made an appointment, and at the appointed hour, I rang the familiar doorbell. Michelle barely changed, only her sparkling eye seemed to have faded. She was wrapped in a handkerchief, holding it to her throat. "Dimitri?" She moved aside, letting me in. She said, "Please come in." She wanted to invite me into the room, but I asked for the kitchen, with which I had a lot to do. I sat down at the kitchen table, like 2.5 years ago. "Michelle." She looked at me. "Have I changed that much?" "Dimitri." With surprise, she even stood up. I understood her. By her calculations, I should have long ago dragged a miserable life in some orphanage. But how? "Have you recovered?" "As you can see," I smiled. "I can't say that I'm glad to see you. I don't like to go back to a place where I was hurt." It was as if Michelle had a breakthrough. She told me that she lived with her new husband for about a year. And then he left her and went to live abroad with Marina, just like her mother. Everything is just awful. It's such a tragedy when you are betrayed by your own children. Really, how would I know that? She is now alone. Marina is far away and does not communicate with her, and the fact that I am with her today is probably fate. And then the eternal theme of women. Forgive me, I'm a bitch. I've always loved only you. Stay with me. I listened to her wailing and didn't say anything. I had nothing to say to her. You know, I didn't revel in her grief or gloat. I even felt sorry for her in a way, but the visit had to come to an end. And that's when my phone rang. My wife called and asked where to pick me up. I gave her the address and said goodbye. Is that your wife? Michelle asked quietly, and her eyes began to fill with tears. Yes. And how long have you been married? Yes.